Welcome to Truth Watchers. I am Heath Henning. As we continue our discussion about the New Age infiltrating Christianity, we will be discussing contemplative prayer today. For the last month or so, I have been discussing this topic and have barely scratched the surface of the issue. If anyone is interested in more information, a more thorough, detailed explanation, check out my book, Crept in Unawares, Mysticism. I have a chapter on contemplative prayer in that book, and a lot of the information I have covered in the past 4 or 5 podcasts have been from that book. Plus, the last 2 weeks, I had the opportunity to have Dr. Chris Berg on the show to discuss the New Age infiltrating churches. He wrote the book, The New Age Trojan Horse, What Christians Need to Know About Yoga and the Enneagram. Chapter 2 of Dr. Berg's book is titled Infiltration of the New Age Movement into Christianity. The opening sentence of this chapter, found on page 23, states, quote, "The New Age movement penetrated Christianity at distinct times and often through calculated methods such as New Age meditation and New Age music," unquote. I would strongly agree with these two techniques are the main methods that the New Age is using to infiltrate churches. We will focus on meditation techniques infiltrating churches in this episode. Again, I want to draw our attention to what I covered a couple of weeks ago, that the goal to infiltrate churches is being accomplished by attacking the sufficiency of the Bible by replacing it with occult techniques. I discussed this in a previous episode about the New Age plan is to replace the didactic worldview of Christianity, which places the authority in the propositional truth as provided in the Bible, with a dialectic worldview, which brings about a worldview of personal experiences are the authority, and effectively replacing the authority of the Bible. So it comes down to, how does God reveal himself to man? In the didactic worldview, God reveals himself through the Bible. Thus, God's revelation is objective, and we all can read it and test what others claim about it. In the dialectic worldview, God reveals himself through mystical experiences to the individual. This makes revelation subjective and untestable. Every individual can have a different experience which is untestable, and nobody can say there is a right or wrong interpretation of a personal experience. There can be no testing of the spirits as commanded in 1 John chapter 4. In his book, The 60s Spiritual Awakening, American Religion Moving from Modern to Postmodern, Robert Elwood, a historian who has thoroughly researched the development of occultism in America's history, explained on page 332, quote, "Natural religion believes this innate presence may be tapped by a normal quickening of spiritual sensitivity, which can be aided by various techniques of insights but does not require extraordinary grace. Faith in nature's God may affirm hidden occult natural forces that go beyond reason as ordinarily understood, including trust in psychic energies and powers of mind that seem almost magical," unquote. Now, what Elwood refers to as natural religion in this quote is raw paganism. It is natural religion as opposed to revealed religion, that is something revealed through a body of scripture. Natural religion views the ability to tap into an innate divine presence by using some sort of technique to gain knowledge from God. He is explaining the religious atmosphere of the 1960s. Of course, the New Age has been infiltrating churches earlier than the 60s, but the emphasis is that this mentality of Christians, the dialectic thinking, became a dominant worldview of churches during that decade. Actually, the dialectic philosophy had infiltrated America's public education system in the 1950s through Benjamin Bloom's 2-volume set titled Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, which had caused the generation in the 60s to turn largely to the New Age. Dean Goucher wrote on page 6 through 7 of the book The Dialectic and Praxis, Volume 2, quote, "Bloom's taxonomies are Marxist training manuals used to educate teachers in the United States of America and around the world, including communist China, to think and teach dialectically, to praxis the dialectic. These books have been used from the 50s on. They are the foundation for teacher certification around the world, unquote. The education system is one of the major perpetrators in causing the dialectic thinking which paved the way for the New Age. What I want to point out is the fact that it has only gotten worse since then. Dave Hunt and Tom McMahon warned of how occult techniques were being used to subtly infiltrate many churches. They wrote in the book The Seduction of Christianity, page 11, quote, "The seduction does not take place as an obvious frontal assault from rival religious beliefs that would be vigorously resisted. Instead, it comes to some Christians in the guise of faith-producing techniques for gaining spiritual power and experiencing miracles, and to others as self-improvement psychologies for fully realizing human potential that are seen as scientific aids to successful Christian living," unquote. Again, what they noted here is that the infiltration is not an obvious attack attempting to change theology. The infiltration comes as faith-producing techniques. Virginia Essene is a New Age medium who claims to have channeled the Christ. She wrote a book titled New Teachings for an Awakened Humanity. This book is supposed to be the message from this spirit claiming to be the Christ. Obviously, this is an attempt to infiltrate Christianity, but what you need to understand about the messages channeled from this false Christ is the emphasis on meditation. Right from the beginning of this book, this spirit entity says on page 1, quote, "I have chosen to communicate through this process of mental telepathy and to transmit my thoughts to humanity on the planet Earth today via a living Earth dweller with whom I have good mental rapport and telepathic contact. But I would come to you as well if you would build a meditation bridge for it, dear ones," unquote. Here the quote says there's a specific Earth dweller who the spirit makes contact through to give these messages, but also encourages others to use meditation to build their own contact with the spirit realm. Throughout this entire book, the spirit entity frequently emphasizes the need for people to start meditating. In another quote from page 15 through 16, this is expressed with these words, quote, "But I assure all who will listen and participate that no matter what is to follow, you will be advised through your daily meditation of what actions you are to take. We will provide you with the safety of our daily communications. If you are a God-committed worker who has opened your personality to your soul level through contemplation, meditation, and prayer, the Golden Christ energy is at your disposal. And a part of my message regards the necessity for everyone on the planet to meditate every day without fail," unquote. The spirit identifying itself as the Christ says we need to meditate every day without fail. The spirit continues to discuss meditation on page 90, providing this comment as the definition for meditation. Quote, "Meditation is listening. I have used the word meditation to mean listen to God. Contemplation may also be a useful word here. Be still and know that I am God is the way this was previously given in the Bible," unquote. So we are not told to pray, but to listen. Sit quietly and listen for a message from God or a spirit who may identify as the Christ. It becomes alarming to recognize how frequently this verse, Psalm 46:10, is used to teach this same message in so-called Christian publications. This is the heresy of contemplative prayer, which is not prayer according to how the Bible defines it, but rather meditation, according to the way it is defined and practiced in Eastern religions. Psalms 46:10 has nothing to do with prayer or meditation, and one must be ignorant of context and hermeneutics to come up with such a ridiculous interpretation. However, meditation is the unifying message from the New Age leaders. Alice Bailey said the exact same thing in her book, From Intellect to Intuition, page 61. Quote, "The education and reorientation of the advanced human beings must find its place in our mass education. The experienced voice of the Eastern wisdom comes to us with one word, meditation. The question naturally arises, is that all? And the answer, yes." Unquote. This is the one message, meditation, that's all. This is how the New Age is infiltrating churches, and this is not something new. It is as old as paganism and as old as the earliest infiltration of Christianity, ancient Gnosticism. James L. Garlow and Peter Jones mention in the book Cracking the Da Vinci Code, page 182. Quote, "One of the Gnostic scrolls calls for an entry into that which is silent, the place which has no need for utterance nor for comprehending." Unquote. They are referencing a Gnostic tractate of the Apocryphon of James, chapter 4, verses 19 through 21. Peter Jones related in an earlier publication of his about how the Gnostic scriptures revealed contemplative prayer was a major practice of the various Gnostic cults. In his book, The Gnostic Empire Strikes Back, an old heresy for the New Age, page 33 through 34. Jones states, quote, "Hints of such techniques are found in some of the documents discovered at Nag Hammadi. In Zostrinos, the author sets out a program that others are to follow, including ascetic practices and meditation to reduce chaos in the mind, and by which he receives a first vision of the divine presence. After being deeply troubled, he sees a vision of the messenger of the knowledge of eternal light. Few accounts of these techniques have survived in written form since the Gnostics followed the secrecy patterns of the Greco-Roman mystery religions. Enough, however, is divulged in this one text and implied in others to reveal how central such techniques are to the entire system." Unquote. The Gnostic text Elogenes the Stranger, believed to have been written around 240 AD, also makes allusions to the practice of contemplative prayer. The translator states in the introduction to this text, quote, "Most significantly, Elogenes the Stranger is perhaps the earliest attempt in the history of Western mysticism to combine these resources into a contemplative technique in which, although beginning with acts of discursive discernment of both oneself and the supreme unknowable one, complete intuition of the one is achieved only at the point where one abandons any positive attempt to know him." Unquote. Probably the best book dedicated to exposing contemplative prayer is Ray Younging's book, A Time of Departing. The first edition was published in 2002 and the second edition was in 2006. In his discussion of the history of contemplative prayer, he focused on the Desert Fathers, and the only mention of Gnostics is in a quotation which he heeds little attention to as a factor of the history. He seemed to insinuate the Desert Fathers played around with different ideas of prayer, some adapted from the East, and happened to develop contemplative prayer on their own. The Desert Fathers were the earliest monks who broke away from society because they wanted to escape the prevailing evil and sin. They started small communities in the desert. However, these small communities were influenced by Gnosticism. Historian Robin Lane Fox wrote about the Desert Fathers and particularly how one of these communities were likely the place that produced the Gnostic texts we identify today as the Nag Hammadi scriptures. In his book Pagans and Christians, pages 414 through 415, Fox wrote, quote, "Barely 5.5 miles from the discovery of these books," referring to the Nag Hammadi texts, lay a major monastic community founded by the great Pachomius, father of this type of monasticism in Egypt. His own first monastery was only 3 miles distant. In theory, the filling of the bindings could have derived from any rubbish heap elsewhere, but the brilliant conjecture that the books, too, belonged to monks is still the most economical. There were no quote-unquote Gnostics in Nag Hammadi in the mid-4th century, and certainly no studies of Coptic-speaking Hermeticists, pagans who wished to own so many Christian books besides their own. Coptic, however, was the language of the majority in the early Pacomian monasteries. After approximately 350, we know that rumors of rampant unorthodoxy caused their members' opinion to be checked, unquote. Though we can acknowledge it was the Desert Fathers that bequeathed this practice to later monks in the Catholic Church, and the Catholic mystics influenced all the major modern streams who are responsible for bringing this heretical practice into contemporary Christianity, we have to point the finger back to Gnosticism as the origin of this practice infiltrating the churches. In my book, Crept In Unawares, I document how this history and through various influences from individuals have caused this heresy to permeate Christianity. Catholics, Protestants, Charismatics, New Evangelicals, and fundamentalism, every sector which claims the name of Christian, has been impacted by this heretical practice of contemplative prayer. When Ray Youngin first published his book, A Time of Departing, many doubted his conclusion and questioned if this was really as far spread as he claimed. The reality was he hardly scratched the surface of how far spread it had become, even in the early 2000s when he wrote the book. It has only grown, reaching further and spreading more rapidly with the endorsements of major names of Christian leaders. I did a series on contemplative prayer in the past on my podcast, but it is only available as audio. Maybe I can try to convert it series to video sometime soon. If you would be interested in me doing that, let me know in a comment. One of the episodes from that series discussed an extremely popular book by Sarah Young, Jesus Calling, along with another influential Christian author, A.W. Tozer. So many Christians get upset with me for saying Tozer was a mystic, but he was, and it's not just me saying it. All his biographers have confirmed it. Warren Wiersbe offers a biographical sketch of A.W. Tozer in the Living with the Giants, Lives of Great Men and Faith, stating on page 226, Aidan Wilson Tozer considered himself as evangelical mystic, unquote. Wiersbe also mentions on page 227, David J. Fant, at the end of his biography of Tozer, listed the books and authors that most influenced Tozer, and this list is something of a basic bibliography on the mystics, unquote. This list contains names such as Madame Guyon, George Fox, Sorensen Kierkegaard, and Meister Eckhart. Warren Wiersbe then warns on page 229, quote, like poison, these matters should be handled, but not permitted into one's system, unquote. Wiersbe also related a conversation he had with Martin Lloyd-Jones. Quote, Martin Lloyd-Jones and I were discussing the mystics over dinner one evening, and he related an interesting experience. With his permission, I repeat it here. Dr. Tozer and I shared a conference years ago, he said, and I appreciated his ministry and his fellowship very much. One day he said to me, Lloyd-Jones, you and I hold just about the same position on spiritual matters, but we have come to this position by different routes. How do you mean? I asked. Well, Tozer replied, you came by the way of Puritans and I came by the way of the mystics. And you know, he was right, unquote. This is from Warren Wiersbe's book, 10 People Every Christian Should Know. My simple point here is that mysticism is humongous influence in Christianity, and most people are ignorant of the fact they are influenced by people teaching such things. This is Heath Henning. Thank you for tuning in to Truth Watchers podcast. Remember to hit the subscribe button or share it with a friend. For more fascinating facts, check us out at truthwatchers.com, because sound apologetics and exegesis of scriptures is important for all of God's children, as is indicated in 3 John verse 4. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth.